Think you know Henry VIII? How about the king whose festering leg sores stank so badly his approach could be smelled from several rooms away? Who executed people simply because he dreamed of their treason, and whose coffin, in the end, exploded from the gases of decomposition right in the middle of his funeral procession, splattering mourners with the remnants of his majesty? This is the story they definitely won't tell you in school. And now you'll learn how physical pain and insane paranoia turned a man into one of history's most terrifying monsters. His body was a walking biohazard. All right, folks, buckle up. Today, we're diving into a darkness so deep, it'll give you goosebumps. We're going to talk about a man whose body wasn't just a body. It was a walking biohazard. Literally. And I'm not exaggerating. Let's start with something simple. His weight, 400 pounds. To give you an idea of the scale of this tragedy, that's like two healthy men. It's like a small grand piano. And all that mass wasn't solid muscle. Oh no. It was a mountain of fat, pain, and despair that he had to haul around every single day. And now for the icing on this rotten cake. His legs. Imagine non-healing, constantly festering ulcers that covered both his shins. Historians write that they were enormous, foul-smelling, and constantly weeping. Pus soaked through the bandages, which were then ripped from his legs, taking flesh with them, just to apply new ones. But the most horrifying part was the smell. Courtiers discreetly noted in their diaries that the sickly sweet stench of rot could be smelled from several rooms away before the ruler himself came into view. Can you imagine? You're walking through the palace, and suddenly you're hit by a wave of odor, like from an open morgue. And you know, His Majesty is near. But wait, there's more. This hulking mass couldn't move on its own, of course. He was hauled around the palace using special mechanisms, some sort of tackles and hoists that the engineers of the time built specifically for him. The great king, being lifted and carried like a sack of offal. Add to that complete, uncontrollable incontinence. Yes, you heard that right. The man who held an entire country in fear couldn't control his own bladder and bowels. It was absolute, total, daily humiliation. And this brings us to the most important point, the one they won't tell you about in boring history textbooks. They'll show you portraits of a cruel tyrant, tell you about the executions and the paranoia, but they won't connect it to this. A few years before his body began to fall apart, he suffered a terrible injury at a jousting tournament. He fell from his horse in full armor and took a massive blow to the head, after which he was unconscious for several hours. What if that blow damaged not just his body, but his brain? What if his frontal lobes, responsible for self-control, empathy, and common sense, were affected? Think about it. You're trapped in a 400-pound rotting prison. Every movement causes hellish pain. You constantly feel humiliated. You reek of death. Could you remain kind and rational, or would that physical agony inevitably turn your soul into the same kind of rotting nightmare? And that, my friend, is the real dark history. The story of how a wounded body gives birth to a wounded monster. He treated his wives worse than a serial killer. All right, people, strap yourselves in. Today, we're diving into the story of a guy everyone knows, Henry VIII. And here's the main spoiler that will flip your school day knowledge on its head. He treated his wives worse than any serial killer. Yes, you heard me right. A maniac, what does he do? He catches you, kills you, and that's the end of the story. But Henry, oh, this guy was a true connoisseur of psychological torture. He savored the process. Let's start with his most famous victim, Anne Boleyn, just chopping off her head for an infidelity he most likely invented himself. boring. Henry decided to put on a show. Can you imagine? You, sentenced to death, are given a front row seat, so that you, my dear, can get a good look at how the others will be executed. And who's on the program for this bloody theater? Oh, just minor characters, your own brother, and 4 other men who were simply labeled as your lovers. You sit and watch the executioner's axe fall again and again. You hear that vile, wet crunch. You smell the warm, metallic scent of fresh blood hit your nostrils, and you know, you're next. This isn't just an execution. It's a calculated, sadistic humiliation designed to break you before your heart even stops beating. But wait, there's more. Let's fast forward to wife number 5, the young Catherine Howard. By then, Henry was an old, bloated boar with a perpetually rotting, stinking wound on his leg that physicians were afraid to even touch, and he was paranoidly obsessed with the idea that his new wife had to be, well, you get it, a virgin. And this, friends, is where we get to the part they definitely won't tell you in history class. He didn't just hope. He, for God's sake, passed a special law. A law stating that any woman who concealed her non-virginity from the king would be executed for high treason. He literally created a legal trap specifically for his 19-year-old wife. To understand the scale of his ego, it's not that you're not right for me. It's that you're a criminal for not meeting my expectations before we even met. Naturally, Catherine had a past, and she was executed under that very law. Brilliant, isn't it? And what about his first wife, Catherine of Aragon? He lived with her for more than 20 years. Think he just gave her a divorce and let her go? Not a chance. He locked her away in some dilapidated, damp castle under house arrest, stripped her of her title as queen. But the cruelest part, he forbade her from seeing their only daughter, Mary. Imagine, you're stripped of everything. Your name is dragged through the mud, but you can still endure that. And then they take your child from you. You know she's alive, somewhere nearby, but you'll never see her again. Catherine died alone, begging in her letters to be allowed even one glance at her daughter. The request was denied. So, yes, serial killers look like amateurs next to him. They take a life. But this monster in a crown took everything from his women, their dignity, their hope, their sanity, and only then, when nothing but an empty, broken shell remained, did he mercifully grant them death. His eating habits were utter madness. All right, folks, buckle up. Today we're talking about grub. Yes, grub, because calling what went on at our hero's table a meal just doesn't feel right. His eating habits were complete, total madness. To give you a sense of scale, 5,000 calories a day. 5,000. That's like eating 10 Big Macs every single day and not to build muscle like some bodybuilder. No, it was simply because he could, because his stomach was as bottomless a pit as his ego. But wait, there's more. The calories are just the appetizer. Our guy genuinely believed that food had magical properties. Want to be graceful and majestic? Eat swans. Seriously, he would order roasted swans for himself to, so to speak, absorb their grace. Can you picture it? And for manly vigor? Well, you get the picture. Dozens, hundreds of oysters in one sitting. Not because they were tasty, but because they were, you see, an ancient recipe for potency. He was literally trying to eat his way to charisma and a libido. And now, for the really brutal part. Paranoia. He was so terrified of being poisoned that he kept a whole army of food tasters. And this is something they definitely won't tell you in history class. You think they just took a bite and that was it? Not a chance. The procedure was hellish. After tasting the food, the poor soul would sit in a corner and wait. For 30 minutes, a half hour of pure animal terror. Imagine, you're sitting there, and slow-acting poison might already be dissolving in your stomach. Every second stretches into an eternity. You listen to your body, a twinge in your side, feeling dizzy. Cold sweat drips down your back. This wasn't a job. It was a game of Russian roulette 3 times a day. And all the while, he would sit there, calmly watching you like a lab rat. He couldn't care less about your fear, about your life. Humiliation? Pain? For him, it was just part of the dining ritual. And against the backdrop of all this feasting, an official decree: no peasant food at court. Brown bread, porridge, simple stew, all of it was strictly forbidden. Food for the rabble. While his people somewhere were choking on dry crusts, he was ordering dishes you can't even pronounce. It wasn't just gluttony. It was a way of saying, I am a god, and you are dust beneath my feet. So the next time you see a painting of a lavish royal feast, just remember, behind every dish lay not just indulgence, but a mad belief in magic, a primal fear of death, and tons of contempt for ordinary people. And a man like that ruled the fates of millions. Appetizing, isn't it? His paranoia turned the palace into a maximum security prison. All right, people, strap in. Today, we're diving into a darkness so bleak, the devil himself would ask to dim the lights. You think a palace is all about balls, lavish gowns, and champagne? Today, I'll tell you about a ruler whose paranoia turned his golden halls into a maximum security prison, where everyone was both an inmate and a warden at the same time. In short, forget cozy royal bedrooms. Our hero slept not with his queen, but with 2, for God's sake, loaded crossbows by his bed. Can you imagine? You're falling asleep, knowing that one wrong move in your sleep, one nightmare that makes you twitch, and a bolt flies from the string, turning your head into a bloody mess. Now that's what I call good night. He didn't even trust his own shadow, but that's just the beginning. To give you an idea of the scale of his madness, the entire palace was riddled with a network of secret passages. These weren't romantic tunnels for trysts with ladies-in-waiting. No, they were narrow, dusty, stinking corridors with tiny peepholes drilled into the walls. He could stand for hours in the dark, pressed against a wall, listening to his ministers discuss the weather. He spied on courtiers as they ate dinner, as they scratched an itch, as they whispered to servants. You're standing there, chatting innocently with someone, while inches away, behind the wallpaper, the monarch's mad eye is hiding, searching your words for treason. What an atmosphere, huh? And this, friends, is where we get to the part they won't tell you in your boring history lessons. He created a vast network of spies. But here's the kicker. He didn't trust them either. So he created a second network of spies to watch the first, and then, probably, a third to watch the second. It was a damn nesting doll of betrayal and snitching. Your best friend, with whom you drank wine yesterday, could be writing a report on you today, while he himself was being watched by a stable boy paid by someone else. No one knew who worked for whom. The palace was saturated with a sticky, nauseating fear. Every creak of the floorboards was the step of an executioner. Every whisper was a conspiracy. The apotheosis of this theater of the absurd. Executions based on dreams. Yes, you heard that right. He could simply dream that his old comrade, who had been through hell and back with him, wanted to poison him. In the morning, the poor soul would be seized, dragged to the block, and he wouldn't even understand why he was dying. Try proving you're innocent when your treason took place in someone else's dream. His paranoia was judge, jury, and executioner. So next time you see a beautiful old palace, just remember this story and think about how much pus, fear, and injustice its luxurious walls can hide. It wasn't a life, it was hell in a gilded cage. Even his corpse caused chaos. All right, buckle up. Today we have a story that will make your hair stand on end. We often talk about how the great and powerful lived and died, but usually, with death, it all ends. Curtain. The end. But not for our hero today. This guy managed to cause such hellish chaos after his death, the living couldn't even dream of it. In short, even his corpse caused chaos. Let's go. To give you an idea of the tragedy's scale, his body began to decompose while he was still alive. No, seriously, I'm not kidding. Some foul disease, whether late-stage syphilis or gangrene, was eating him alive. Chunks of rotting, blackened flesh were literally falling off him while he was still breathing. Can you imagine the smell in the royal chambers and the servants who had to wash and change him? The poor souls just drew straws to see whose turn it was to enter that torture chamber. And then, he finally kicked the bucket. Think everyone breathed a sigh of relief? Not a chance. The problem didn't go away. It just stopped breathing. The body swelled before their eyes like a damn balloon filled with gas and pus. They tried to stuff it into a lead-lined coffin to somehow contain this biological apocalypse, but the process was already unstoppable. And here's a detail they definitely won't tell you in boring history textbooks. Several servants who were lucky enough to prepare the body for the funeral caught some horrific disease from the corpse and died in terrible agony a couple of weeks later. This dude was taking people out, even from beyond the grave. But wait, it gets worse. The day of the funeral arrives. A solemn procession, hundreds of grieving courtiers, tolling bells, everything as it should be. The coffin with the body is slowly being carried through the streets of the capital. And then, right in the middle of the road, in front of the whole well-dressed crowd, kaboom! The coffin explodes, just blows to pieces from the monstrous pressure of the built-up gases of decay. Can you imagine the scene? Bits of, well, you know what? Fly onto the weeping widows, the important nobles, the priests. The street is instantly hit by such a wave of stench that people start vomiting right where they stand. Chaos, panic, screams. Think that's the bottom? Oh no, we're not done digging. From the cracked coffin, a foul brown sludge, all that was left of the mighty ruler, poured onto the cobblestones. And here's the cherry on top of this rotten cake. Stray dogs came running and started licking it all up, right off the road, in front of the stunned aristocracy. Dogs, for crying out loud, were finishing off the king. So there you have it. Even his dead body put on an unforgettable show of humiliation, biological threat, and total chaos. So the next time you hear about great men, just remember that sometimes their most memorable act is the explosion of their own coffin. It's as brutal as it gets.